I am Lewis Pope. I'm the head security nerd at Enable. I was on the MSP side for a lot longer than I've been on this side. So I started out in break fix, went to an MSP that we built up over about 6 years, and now I've been here at Enable for about 3.5 years now. I'm SSCP, so system security certified practitioner, working my CISSP. So I am, this is what I eat, breathe, and sleep about. But since I did come from the MSP space, I'll be talking about things not so much in esoteric terms about, well, you should be concerned with. I'm going to be going a little bit deeper in, the actual, the day-to-day implications of some of these things, because I've had to have the same battles that a lot of you are currently probably going through. So what are we going to be covering today? We're going to be covering, well, why is it important to deal with email security? What's the purpose? How is it important to you as an MSP? Of course, email is the most common attack vector for ransomware right now. It kind of ebbs and flows back and forth between this, RDP exploitations, and other things, but it's usually sitting there on top of the stack. Email is also a direct line to the weakest part of cybersecurity end users. And all your clients and your entire user base is probably relying on email. So that makes the security of email very important. We'll also be going over attack techniques. So we'll be covering business email compromise attacks, embedded links in the content, how you can deal with that with more than just the email filtering, phishing and whaling, and some other things. And we'll also be going into some best practices such as DKIM, setting up DKIM, SPF, and DMARC, malware and sandboxing, and virus scanning. And also we'll be talking about cybersecurity awareness training throughout the session today, just because of the fact, back to the first thing of email is a direct line to your end users, and they are the weakest part of your defenses. So we are going to start out with, well, what is mail security? So whenever we talk about mail security, what are we referencing? And for the purpose of today's conversation, when we talk about email security, we're just referring to the collection of processes, technologies, and training that protect email accounts, their content, end users, and infrastructure from unauthorized access, loss of confidentiality, loss of integrity, loss of availability, and malware and bad actors. It's just anything and everything you do that's even tangentially or directly related with email, securing email. So right into the first part of, well, why is email security important? So it is your first line of defense in most situations. And a primary function of an MSP is to keep threats as far away from end users and data as possible. And an email filtering solution is probably going to be part of that first layer of defense. It's going to sit out there on the perimeter, and its job is to prevent as much as it can from getting into your internal environments. You're not going to just do this and walk away, though. You're not going to put just an email protection in place of some sort and then just call it quits. You're going to have to do other things that improve the overall security of your environments to contend with the situations that email filtering or some other type of email-based attack actually gets through your defenses. And the volume and tactics of phishing, ransomware, and other malicious emails have accelerated over the past year due to the transition to work from home because of COVID. Estimates are back. There are multiple estimates out there, but most of them kind of settle around in the fact that there's about 600% increase in email-based attacks in 2020, and that's only persisted. So the outside threats that are looking for ways into your environments is only going to get worse. It's only going to get more sophisticated, and it's not something you're going to be able to just, again, you can't rely on the default inbuilt security that may be in certain email hosting solutions, and we'll go into that a little bit deeper towards the end of the session. So, this part that was about protecting as the first line of defense. But then there is the last line of defense, which is your end users. Many email attacks, such as business email compromise attacks, can avoid detection by email security products. And you have to rely on the end users being educated enough that they can figure out that something's wrong. Sometimes you cannot rely on them being educated enough. That's what cybersecurity awareness training is part of. You're hardening that last line of defense. But there are also other things you can do that are not, they're not a technology solution, it's a process solution, and we'll get into those a little bit later as well too. So the importance of email security, keeping it secret, keeping it safe, safeguarding data from internal and external threats. That's what it's all about. A business needs to have confidence that emails won't just disappear or be altered. So more than just are the emails available and am I blocking viruses? There is also a part to email security that is about the integrity of the information. So being able to go to a client or have a client say, we need access to emails from 1.5 years ago, give it to us. And if you have, depending on what you're set up with, that could be easier, that could be hard. If you have a archiving solution set up, which is great, archiving solutions have their purpose, and you can reach into your archives and pull them out, and you can be confident that that is the exact email as it was when it came in or it went out. If you're, instead of doing archiving, you're backing up emails uh, from your email servers, then, well, there's a little bit of wiggle room there for did we capture everything or not? Uh, because a lot of people will get caught up in what is the difference between an archiving emails and backing up emails. And well, archiving emails is all emails that come into the mail server get archived regardless of anything else, versus backing up emails that are on the email server. Well, when did the backup run? Are you catching things that are in the retention folders or not? Or do you have, how long are you keeping your backup sets? Things like that can affect your retention rates, and regulations and standards are going to force you to choose one of those in certain, most of the time. I've always personally, I've just treated archiving as my retention for um, integrity purposes, for compliance and achieving certain standards, and backup is for just making my life easier. So whenever I do need to restore files because somebody, oops, I accidentally deleted a folder I shouldn't have, it is much easier to retrieve that information from a backup than it is than trying to grab it back out of archiving. Because if you're archiving it, great, you have the original email, but you have no clue whether the user stuck that email eventually in their folder structure. So backups are superior for those types of situations. Also, email security, it just benefits you as an MSP. It is an additional revenue stream. You also increase security, leads to better client retention. It helps out with client churn, because if anybody here knows that if you screw up, depending on the degree of which that happened, whether it was your fault or not, the fact that it happened on your watch makes it your responsibility. And what is the client going to think about that? And every threat blocked at the perimeter can be a threat you don't have to remediate at the endpoint. So you're playing the statistics game here. As much defense as you can put out at the edge, at the perimeter, as many phishing emails and ransomware booby-trapped emails that you can block, that is a support ticket you're not going to have to work. That is a ransomware attack you don't have to remediate. That is a uncomfortable phone call you have to have with a business owner because somebody in their organization suffered a phishing attack and gave away $30,000 in a wire transfer. Uh, so is a lot of importance in why you should be using email security, a mail filtering solution of some sort, to keep things as far away from you as possible. So we're going to now get into attack techniques. And just as a kind of a heads up, I didn't mention this in the beginning of the session, but they vastly overbooked today's session. They have it up as a 2-hour session. This is really only about a 1-hour session. But we'll have plenty of time because of that, that if anybody has any questions, we can spend plenty of time getting into those. So now we're going to go into attack techniques. So what are the attack techniques for email? Everybody's going to be familiar with a lot of these, but again, this is about getting everybody on a base level of knowledge concerning this. So we're raising, rising tide rises all ships. So we're trying to get everybody up to at least a minimum level of understanding. So there are more attack methods out there than you may think there are, though. So threat actors have a myriad ways that they can leverage email to propagate new and novel types of attacks. Most of them can be protected against pretty easily with just mail filtering or a couple of configuration settings on your servers, mail servers. But there are others that are going to take more effort. And those are usually the ones that are relying on social engineering and and focusing the attack on the weaknesses of an end user. And the first one, of course, is phishing. This is the one that almost everybody is aware of. And they can also be one of the harder things to protect against because phishing attacks do not necessarily have to include anything that is actually malicious in the email itself that a security solution is going to detect. There may not be any link in the email. There may not be any attachments in the email. It may just be plain human readable instructions that somebody is giving somebody, and they may fall for it. So phishing can be the harder one to deal with. Attackers are using tactics usually to lead a user to follow a link or click on a download or grab an asset or an attachment, and that's going to lead to either a malicious website or the theft of credentials or the delivery of malware. Whenever it's this type of a phishing attack, a mail filtering solution should be able to quickly recognize those types of attacks that are using embedded links and attachments. But not anything is ever 100%, and you have to plan resiliency into everything that you do. So you have to allow for those instances where an email filtering solution is not going to catch a phishing attack. So what can you do as an additional layer? So once they breach that outside perimeter defense, what else can you put in their way? What other barricades can you set up that's going to prevent them from gaining more ground? So one of those is a DNS and web filtering solution. So after this email makes it through your email filtering and it's in front of the end user, well, the end user may fall for it and they'll click on the links or they'll grab the attachment. At that point, you're going to be relying on DNS and web filtering to block them from going out to that malicious website that's hosting a bad file or is phishing for credentials or is typo squatting and trying to force a login to a non-existent account there. And if it's in a malicious attachment, you're going to be relying on your local AV or your endpoint protection solution to contend with those malicious attachments to make it through. And also, cybersecurity awareness training is going to be important here because, well, you want to have every advantage you can. And if you don't have to rely on the DNS web filtering or the endpoint protection because the end user was savvy enough to recognize it for what it was and never clicked on anything, oh, that's all the better. And the example I have up here is just, this is the classic one that was floating around a lot for a while there. There was the, sorry, you missed some communications from FedEx. Here, click on this link so you can find out why you missed your delivery. Those types of links. And these are fairly, for a business that operates off of, making sure that things are coming in and going out on time and that things aren't lost in limbo and that packages aren't just sitting somewhere whenever they could instead be generating revenue because it's being sold. Businesses are incentivized to say, oh, I didn't get a delivery for something, I better check into this, because they're going to knee jerk equate that with, if I missed a delivery, then that's hurting productivity, or I'm missing out on revenue somehow. So these are very compelling to a small business to follow these links. Then you also have whaling attacks, which are, they're still phishing attacks, but they focus on high level targets such as C-suite or business owners or presidents. They are much more targeted, and they will usually employ additional social engineering techniques to make them more effective. So this will be going out to LinkedIn, to the local chamber of commerce, getting people's phone numbers, getting people's email addresses, and those types of things, any type of intelligence they can get together. Email filters and DNS web filtering will still help if there are embedded malicious links that are carrying them out somewhere. But most of the time, cybersecurity awareness training is more important for these, since the targets have greater access and control of business resources. And so that's the reason why they are targeted. They are, they are a jackpot. And because of that, attackers are going to be more persistent if they decide to take them on as a target. And again, cybersecurity awareness is going to be your best defense in these situations. Then an even further evolution of that is whenever you get into business email compromise attacks. These became much more prevalent over the past year and a half. The FBI and CISA, they issued some joint advisories and some other communications to warn basically everybody to say, hey, this is getting worse, pay attention. But these are a specific and potentially more damaging type of phishing attack, because the attacker is masquerading their interaction as a legitimate business practice. Attackers will spoof or compromise an email domain of either the victim's domain or of another business that they have relations with. And they'll prepare targeted spear phishing emails to be sent to the target, again, based on all of that intelligence they've gathered from LinkedIn, from Facebook. I heard your dog was sick. How is it? And those kinds of things. And the goal is to have the target reveal confidential information or download malware or ransomware payloads. And the worst version of this is you have somebody that is in the finance department that gets targeted. They've got every bank account information for the whole company. And if it is a smaller organization or a poorly secured organization, then the person in charge of the finances usually has full latitude to kind of do whatever they want to do whenever they want to do it. And operating out of email alone isn't unusual for them. They are used to having the boss or the owner or somebody else send them an email and say, hey, we need XYZ done. Can you transfer some money back and forth? Or, oh, hey, here's a new PO. We need this PO filed. So they're already used to doing these types of business type operations via email, and just kind of take it for granted that whoever's asking them to do it on the other side is somebody that has a right and a legitimate reason to ask them to do it. And that's why these are so dangerous. Personally, my favorite variation on this is you convince the target to use a company account or resources to go out and purchase gift cards, and then take photos of those cards and email them back to the attacker. Whenever you sit down and you talk about it and you ask somebody that has suffered this attack, why did you do it? Did you not realize that this was unusual? They will say, yeah, I thought it was a little weird, but nothing else it just felt weird. Nothing else told me that I shouldn't do it. And that's why on these attacks, one of the only ways sometimes that you can prevent these types of attacks is cyber awareness training, and also developing processes in the client's environment so that whenever these types of requests come through, they can't be honored just because it came through in an email. You can't have it so the business owner or the C-suite or somebody can reach out to the finance department or a secretary or somebody else and say, hey, I want you to do this. And everything is just in the email. There needs to be tertiary out of band communication or validation somehow, somewhere else, a verbal confirmation, pick up the phone and call and verify, a safe word, whatever it is. Something has to be in the process other than just getting the email, because there is really honestly no way to protect against these types of attacks sometimes, because there is nothing suspicious in the email for a mail filtering solution to pick up on. It's just a set of instructions for a person to read and then go do something in the real world. And usually business email compromise is a long game, and there are many red flags that might be thrown up during one of the longer campaigns. This is a direct grab from, I believe, some of the FBI's advisories that they put out, but it's useful. And actually, if you are struggling for material, resources, collateral, and you don't have the resources to go out and purchase a cybersecurity awareness training program from KnowBe4 or Proofpoint or someone else, the FBI and US CERT and CISA, they all have some resources available for this that you can go out and grab and leverage. Now, it's not going to be a turnkey solution. You're going to have to pick pieces and put them together, and then you're going to have to decide how you're going to deliver it, how you're going to do the training. And that might be worth it if you're smaller and you're still just trying to kind of find your feet and you have the bandwidth for it. But whenever you start scaling, you probably need to buy a pre-packaged solution to be able to do it at scale and do it well. But here it's just going through the whole process. So first, an attacker identifies the target, and they're going to be going after a business, and they're going to be going out and grabbing intelligence from LinkedIn, from the company's website, from, they'll find the list of the board of directors. They'll find a list of, whoever you put on, go out to LinkedIn, search for a business, see everybody that works there, start grabbing more information for them. Go check their Facebook page, go check their Instagram. What else can you find about them? And you build this portfolio of intelligence that you will then take and craft a spear phishing campaign or even phishing campaigns where you reach out and you call and you start leaving voicemails. But the target is usually going to be somebody in the finance department, and the attackers are playing a persuasion game. They are relying on charisma, charm, peer pressure, exploitive, other exploitive methods of getting the end user to be more amiable to their request. And once the attacker thinks they've got them on the hook, then they'll take and give them instructions for the next step, for the actual payload, the actual payout, which can be the aforementioned credit card, gift card scam, or it could be direct wire transfers. And those wire transfers are the big ones. Those are the ones that can be $20,000, $30,000, $100,000, $1 million. So these, while they are not as prevalent as, say, ransomware or malware emails or general phishing emails that are hunting for credentials, those vastly outnumber BEC attacks. But the BEC attacks have the capability of being so much more damaging to a business. And again, that goes back to, everything here from step 1 to step 4. There is not a single email security solution that's probably going to help you here. This is all employee training to fight this, and internal processes you set up. So whenever somebody gets an email request to do a file transfer, there's like 3 extra steps that have to be done before that request is verified, such as picking up the phone and calling somebody. Or there's a 1 day or 2 day or a 24-hour or a 60 8-hour window in between the request being made and before it's actually sent, whatever. But there needs to be something more than just a single person getting an email and deciding, I will do what this email tells me to do. So, and there's a bunch of attack techniques that are out there. There's a lot more than what we will cover today. But there's credential theft that's driven by phishing. So you get the phishing email, they click on the link that says, hey, a Microsoft file has been shared. Would you go view it? A business email compromise, those are probably, again, some of the most damaging ones, and they are increasing in frequency. But the malicious site documents and virus attachments, the old way it's always been done, those aren't going anywhere either. They're getting probably, just on volume alone, they're getting worse. Attachments with embedded macros and scripts. This is something that started happening 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. It started becoming more prevalent. And this is a situation where there's a conversation to be had outside of email on this. It's another security conversation to be had here. Most of the time, there is no reason whatsoever why different organizations should be emailing each other Word documents, spreadsheets, or PDF files that have macros or embedded scripts or VBS scripts inside of them. Those are very useful whenever you're using them internally, but as far as like inter-organization or outside of your organization, most of the time you do not need that. That is just a thing that should not be happening. So just block it. Don't accept any on email that come in that way. And if a client does have that necessity, then it's more secure to make those files come in and out via other means, maybe SharePoint, Dropbox, Ignite, something that's more secure than just email. And the more recent attack that's, again, with COVID last year, there was a new opportunity of everybody was going work from home, so everybody needed cloud access and share access instead of file shares on the local networks, and things had to be hastily set up, and users weren't properly trained and they weren't used to this new environment. So one of the things attackers started doing is they started sending links to Google Docs and SharePoint docs that are within their controlled domains or within their compromised domains that they've taken control over, and having those be repositories for phishing attacks, for credential stealing, for malware and ransomware payload drops, because your mail filters aren't going to block access to SharePoint. They're not going to block access to a Google form, most likely, because those are so generic and they're also mission critical for a lot of businesses. So this would be something where you would have to make that decision. Are we going to allow this or not? Do your clients have a lot of interaction with other businesses that work through Google Docs or Google Forms and submissions or whatever? So you have to make that risk evaluation of, well, if nobody's using it, then I should block it. But if people are using it, then, well, I've got to leave it open and have the risk conversation with the client. And email attacks are, of course, they're usually meant to be the entry point for multi-stage attacks, to exploit a vulnerability and gain access so they can make lateral movements or do other damage in the environment. Because whenever, say, somebody clicks on a malicious download or a malicious attachment on an email, they grab it, they open it, the first thing that happens is it doesn't just run ransomware. It's probably a dropper or some other tool that's going to call PowerShell scripts to go off and grab and download something from the internet, from a C2 server somewhere or a content delivery network that's obfuscated, run that PowerShell script, and then any other things that they download, prepare the system for the next steps. And it could be 15 or 20 steps later before it gets to the point where it reaches out to the internet and downloads the ransomware payload. And all of that, every one of those steps in between is opportunities. Well, if you got to that point, that means they defeated your email security perimeter, and then you have to start relying again on DNS filtering, web filtering, on having an endpoint detection system, that layered security approach, that security in depth approach, so that you have an opportunity to stop that attack from propagating any further at multiple points in time. Now we're going to switch over. We're going to talk a little bit about some best practices. And again, we're going to be talking about best practices in the broadest sense of mail security as a whole, not just a, well, this is what you should be doing as a best practice with MailAssure. But most of this, if not all of it, is going to apply to MailAssure, but it's also going to apply to most other mail filtering solutions that are out there and available. So first, we're just going to start out with the basics. Most mail server solutions and mail hosting have some basic controls that can improve the security of your email without having to bring in a security solution or another security service to add on top of it. One of those is like disallowing the sending and receiving of commonly abused attachments. So there's not many good reasons anymore for anyone to still be sending back and forth .doc files. .doc files are not exactly the most secure way of transmitting information back and forth in the first place, but also they have their own unique set of vulnerabilities that allow them to be weaponized. So there's a couple of conversations to have there. One is, well, you can just make the decision of, we're going to go to our mail server, to our filtering solution, wherever we're going to do it, and we're just going to stop .doc files from being received. And you might, expand that out to some other extensions. Like, we're not going to accept .ps1 files, .vbs files, no jar files, things like that. But of course, you're going to have somebody here today is going to have a client that says, no, that is what we use because we use it with because that's what our line of business software outputs, or one of our vendors sends us that, or we have a relationship with another customer or business that uses that format. And at that point, that's whenever you have to have that risk assessment conversation of, well, we appreciate the business reason here about why you need to use it, but there is an important security conversation to have here about why this should not continue to happen, and lay it out for them and let them, and at some point you can make your case and you can be very compelling, but sometimes some clients just will say, nope, I appreciate your input, but I'm going to do what I want to do because it saves me money. And if that's the case, that's fine. You do what you can, but that's one of those opportunities for you to drag out the risk acceptance letter and say, all right, we've informed you of this, what this means for your environment, the business risk associated with it, the technology risk associated with it. We've given you our professional opinion that this should not happen in your environments, but you've overridden our decisions. And that's fine. Just sign this risk acceptance letter that says, don't fix this. Leave it the way it is. All right, that's fine. You've accepted the risk for it. And that's part of that risk sharing agreement that MSPs have with their clients. A part of what you're doing is you are accepting money in exchange for owning some of their risk. And if you can't own and control that risk because they will not allow you to, well, then you got to draw a line in the sand and say, well, it's not my problem anymore. Block receipt of password protected archives. This is another one that, depending on the business and how operations work, you may run into a client that says, well, no, we constantly zip files and password protect them so they're secure and email them back and forth to each other, which is fine. And that was just fine years ago, but it's not so good anymore. Now they should probably be transitioning over to SharePoint, Ignite, some other secure way of transferring files back and forth, having auditability of those files, maintaining control over those files, which you don't get whenever you're just sending somebody a zipped folder. And a reason why on the email security side is that, well, a password protected archive folder cannot be scanned by a mail filtering solution. whatever is inside of that is obfuscated from the scans that a mail filter is going to be looking for. So that is how a lot of attacks get past a lot of perimeter defenses, because they're packaging it inside of a zip file that's password protected, and the end user will get an email that's, sorry you missed your delivery from FedEx. Your redelivery request form is attached. The password is FedEx. Seen plenty of those over the years. And again, you're down to, well, at that point, it's already gotten past your perimeter defenses. You need to rely on the end user knowing that, well, no, I should not open that, or rely on your web filtering, your DNS filtering, your endpoint protection solution. Of course, if we're going back to our original sentiment of block it as far away as possible from end users and data, then just block password protected archives, because in most environments, there's not a good reason to allow them. Also, setting up SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. I'll go in a little bit deeper on these later on if we need to. But these are part of the integrity and as part of the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of email on the global sense of being able to say, yes, that is the person, or that is the server that has permissions to be able to send as that domain, and some other checks that go along with verifying that email is flowing in appropriate and good ways. And then also, just enabling MFA account access for all accounts, especially admin accounts, because, well, one of the worst things that can happen for a business PR wise is for their email accounts to become compromised and then be leveraged in attacks themselves. And an attacker, and this is why auditing, logins, and a bunch of other things are very important. And if an attacker gets admin credentials to a domain, goes in and adds new email addresses, they could operate silently from that email address and do all kinds of damage. And of course, there's also other things they can do, but MFAing all accounts, no excuses, really should be the point we're at now, because identity management is a big part of what MSPs should also be offering. And then, of course, you're going to have to bring more resources to bear than just those few things. And that's because not all hosting solutions are created equal, and you're probably going to need to supplement what the mail server can do by itself with an additional security solution. The default cPanel email hosting, it has minimal security controls. The spam filtering isn't very good in it. You can do some neat things and do some tweaking, but it's, you have to constantly keep it up. So being able to have a mail filtering solution that you can use with a cPanel, if you have clients that are still using those types, or if they're using mail daemons or something else. They also have, well, a benefit of using something like MailAssure and the class of solutions that it is since it's an inline mail filtering solution, you don't have to change anything about your email environment. Your email hosting can stay the same. Your internal rules and workflows for email, once it's inside of the domain, can stay the same. You're just changing public MX records to point to us, so we can pre-process the emails before we send it to your email server. And there are some other benefits there too of, well, since we are now the public face of your email domain, where you're able to have a little bit more security through obfuscation, because your email server is not being publicly announced on the internet anymore. They see us, and we have load balancing, DDoS protections, and a whole other slew of things that you're not going to have with just a standard, not even standard, with a lot of email hosting solutions. Even Microsoft 365 email hosting can be lacking if you do not have the correct licensing. If you have an account set up for Microsoft and it's just the lowest level M365 business licenses you can buy, you're not getting much more better email protection there than somebody that's using a free Outlook account. Because if you try to get, and if you do need those extra things and you are willing to pay for those extra bells and whistles for email security that uh, 365 has, well, there are some things in there that can't be taken care of by an external security solution. There's like some DLP stuff and some other things that have to be internal to your mail server itself. But by the time you go through, add those licensing and the configuration and everything, most of the time you can still go off and buy a third party mail filtering solution for cheaper and still get the same end results. And also, there's something to be said for improving your processes, because again, sometimes problems take more than just a technical solution. So all of those attack techniques that we went over earlier, that they cannot be solved by just buying a piece of software, configuring it, and putting it in place. You're going to need cybersecurity awareness training for end users so that they are more resilient to those types of attacks. Helping clients establish a system of checks and balances for business requests made via email. Major business functions for a company should not be, I got an email and it told me to do this thing that that involves hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in company resources. If it asks for more than $200, there needs to be a verbal call or some other out of band communication to get approval for it. And that could be a accounts payable and receivable platform, or a double journal entry service of some, whatever you got for the accountants and the bookkeepers and the finance department. But there needs to be something more than just an email from someone who says there's a business owner and that a couple of $1,000 should be transferred to this ACH. And also move sensitive work into secure platforms. So there are a lot of businesses that run their business completely out of email. And while it is functional in the sense that it functions and you can get things done with it, sometimes it doesn't scale well, and it is definitely not the most secure way of doing it. So if you have a client that is, almost every email they generate is just a email of, oh, here's that file, here's that document, here's that PDF, here's that whatever, that should probably be moved into something like SharePoint or Ignite or Dropbox or any of those types of solutions where you can get some additional controls and auditability on those files once they, leave the organization. And that can also help because, those platforms are going to have their own security measures in there. So, security in depth. And of course, there are a lot more recommendations we can get into, but again, this wasn't meant to be a master class in how to configure a specific email solution or filtering solution. It's about getting you more base knowledge to start operating with, so you can find your feet faster and start going in a actionable direction more quickly. So these are, of course, attachment filtering based on extensions, scanning linked documents. So most email filtering solutions are going to have this in them. They may not have it enabled as a default setting, but having it so whenever an email comes in and has a link in it, a URL, that the filtering solution goes and checks what is on the other side of that URL, downloads it into a sandbox, and then runs testing against it to see if it's malicious or not. Block files with embedded macros. Again, there are not many situations where different organizations should be sending emails that have files with macros inside of them. So that should be a hard stop for most environments. Use Outlook plugins that can help end users train filtering rules. So not just Outlook, Thunderbird, MacMail, whatever kind of client they have. If the filtering solution has a plugin for it, it's worthwhile of adding that there so that the users can train the system. Because you're going to have an organization of maybe 80 people, there's 80 employees there. a phishing campaign happens, and not everybody's going to answer. Not everyone is going to read that email at the same time. There's going to be 1 or 2 people that read it within the first 2 minutes it gets there. There's going to be a few more people that read it within the 6 minutes that it gets there. 8 or 10 minutes later, more people can read it. But chances are somebody, one of those early people, is going to recognize it for being a phishing campaign or spam or having malicious things inside of it. And then they can use that plugin to train the platform. They can tell it, hey, this is a bad thing and you got it wrong. You made the wrong judgment call. This is spam. This is malicious. It should be blocked. You can also augment that, of course, with a making sure your clients are aware of and that you have a process set up for that whenever a malicious email is discovered by an end user, they have a set course of action they're supposed to go through. They're not supposed to just delete it. They're supposed to reach out to a point of contact, whether that is internal to the company, somebody you have set up as, you've provisioned or you've delegated out admin rights to them so they can manage their own environment, or they're supposed to reach out to you. But there should be a set defined route for, I got an email, it looks suspicious. Who am I supposed to tell about this? And that is something that, again, a lot of MSPs, until you get into a situation where you get burned because of that and you realize, oh, if only somebody would have told me about this, I could have stopped it, then there's a lot of MSPs out there that aren't doing this. And it's a simple thing and it can pay off in spades if you do. Also, you can consider disallowing whitelisting by end users. There's not a lot of situations, again, if you're not giving white glove treatment to clients, you're going to automate things. So you may be inclined to give them the ability to whitelist stuff. But again, you're now relying on the judgment of a non-professional end user to judge whether something was bad or not. Adjust spam filters to prevent something novel like suspicious rather than spam. So like with MailAssure, you have the ability with MailAssure to adjust the aggressiveness of the filtering, that whenever it does qualify something as a problem, it will prepend something to the subject line. And the default for a lot of solutions and for a lot of people and for many, many, many years has just been to prepend spam on an email. But an end user sees spam, they're going to have certain connotations with that word, and that's going to elicit a certain response in their head. And they're going to say, well, it says spam, that means it's not dangerous. It may just have gotten it wrong, and it's in my spam filter again. So let me open this up and read it. So that's why I personally favor using something more aggressive like suspicious or potentially dangerous or whatever you're going to be able to use that's going to get that point across of, look, this is probably a bad thing, and unless you are 101% sure about it, you should leave it alone. Also, with filtering, so the thresholds that are available in MailAssure, start out high and take it lower as needed, because, well, if you start out too low, you could be letting too much stuff through and compliant, and then you can get complaints about, well, hey, we're getting all this spam. But if you start out high, well, then you've got the opposite problem. Well, you have end users complaining that too much is getting put into quarantine, which, yes, that is more work for the end user, but that is, again, we're playing the statistics game here. That's reducing your chances that something's going to go wrong and happen. So start high and back it down just to the point where they stop complaining that too much is going to quarantine. And of course, there might be a point where you have to just set your, draw a line in the sand, put your foot down and say, nope, this is just the way it is, because if we go any lower than this, then the product, the service, the solution isn't doing you any good. Subscribing to spam and malware blacklists. So if you're using a mail filtering solution like MailAssure or any of the other bigger options, they are already going to have that built into the platform. They're already going to be updating constantly spam and malware blacklists. You can try to do this yourself. You can go off and you can subscribe and you can pay for a blacklist subscription and try to manage it yourself, but you have to manage it yourself. And that's just one more thing you're adding to your workload without major benefits. What's the cost efficiency there? You would probably have lost less money on time spent rather than just, having a solution that automatically does it for you. And also making this all as convenient as possible for end users without sacrificing security. So security is not convenient. It's not meant to be. It can only be so convenient before it becomes ineffective. So whenever you get into designing and choosing end user training, and whenever you get into, well, how am I going to have users report things? You have to keep that in mind, that the individual end user may only have to take that action once or twice. So they're not going to be proficient with it. They're not going to immediately know what it is. So you always have to make it as easy as possible for them, but again, without sacrificing security. So it's been pretty quiet on the questions. I have not seen many come through. So again, I'm encouraging, if you've got a question, anything I've covered, something I didn't cover and you're curious about, throw it in the questions section. I'll answer that, because at this point we're about down to, well, the sales pitch side of it. It's not really going to be that much of a sales pitch. It's just going to be a real quick, well, this is what MailerSure has available for you, in the sense of, well, what is MailerSure, where does it sit, and kind of what can it do for you. So MailerSure is a 100% cloud-based solution. You do not have to host it anywhere. It's on our infrastructure, and because it's on our infrastructure, we have tons and tons and tons of extra security around that. So we've got things like load balancing and DDoS protections and other things, so that we can take the brunt force of that rather than your email server taking the brunt force of it. There's also pre and post acceptance filtering that's happening. So an email gets directed to MailerSure. There's going to be some pre-processing it does to validate whether it should even bother doing anything else with that email, such as reputation, judging against reputation feeds that they have set up, making sure that destination domain verification, did it come from where it said it came from, checking it against IP blacklisting, rate limiting, making sure that the headers are properly formed, doing an SPF check for it, checking against the whitelist. And then once it gets through that pre-acceptance, then it goes into post-acceptance. And that's whenever it stops into DMARC and DKIM verifications, fingerprinting the email to see if it matches any other ongoing or previous campaigns, the proprietary heuristics that they use for other things inside of it, the sandboxing, the malware and the virus scanning that it does, and even the application of the user-defined rules that you set up in the platform. Yeah, I'll get to that quick. I got 2 questions in. I'll get those. And also, with this flow here and the way this works is that since it's cloud-based, we're taking the brunt of the abuse on the outside. You can actually see some performance improvements on mail servers that are kind of getting beat up too much by traffic. And yeah, those questions are coming. All right, so some of the questions that have come up. Emails that contain PDF attachments, since they're being read-only, are there macros or such that can cause the PDF file to be dangerous? Yes, there are. PDFs can be booby-trapped. They are, right now, there aren't any like large campaigns running that are leveraging PDF attacks, but they do exist. It's usually I believe the last one that I'm aware of was one that whenever you opened the PDF, it made a call to use the signature function within inside of PDF, and they abused that to call PowerShell to go start a attack chain. So it is not common. There's no active campaigns I know of at the moment, but it is definitely something that can happen. PDF files can be weaponized. Another question on, all right, so DMARC and SPF. So with DMARC and SPF, let me change over to some other slides I've got here that specifically talk about that. So you can think of SPF, DKIM, and DMARC as email DNS for, well, email DNS with some checks and balances. SPF, Sender Policy Framework. This is defining that an email should come from on behalf of domain. So this is something you have to worry about, like with Enables Backup Solution. Enables Backup Solution has the ability to send out emails as part of alerts, as part of reports and whatnot, and it can send it as your email address. The problem is, though, is that if you do not add an SPF record for this, then anybody that's receiving that email is going to see that it says it comes from your email domain, or that the email belongs to your domain, but it was sent from a server that is not associated with your domain. So that can be a red flag. That's, you know, part of how spoofing happens. So this can help with that. DKIM is another way of verifying that emails come from the right sender, and that is that's a public-private key pairing that makes that happen. And then DMARC is an extra set of compliance and kind of controls that go along with all of this. So anybody that has ever went to your registrar, to your DNS records with your registrar, and you look through it, and you know you got your MX records, A records, a bunch of other stuff. Well, you can add a record there that gives it extra instructions about what all of the email servers and the rest of the world are supposed to do whenever they're interacting with your mail server. Should you be setting these all up as default, as you know, as just a baseline thing? Yes, you should. If you've never done it before, is it intimidating? Yes, it is intimidating to set this up for the first time, because you know, usually most people are pretty apprehensive about messing with registrar DNS information because it's easy to blow stuff up. But it is something that is worthwhile. It is something you should learn to be able to do. And also, you know, there's a margin game to be played here. You could have, depending on, you know, the client base that you support. If you still have kind of a mix of, well, I've got clients that are on full managed services and we do everything for them, but then we got some other businesses that we just kind of, we go along and we fix things as they call, but we also take care of their email and stuff. Well, you could have your services, your security services around email set up as two different things. You could have it as, well, for the people that cannot afford to spend the money, or that you can't, you know, to do a little, you know, discretionary pricing with them. You may not include the SPF, DKIM, and DMARC just because, well, it can be a headache to set up and you're not going to waste the time and you can't really make any extra money off of them. But, you know, is that worth the lower security they're going to have? And you have to make the risk assessment there. And then for your clients that are on the full-blown managed services agreement and you're handling everything for them, then yes, this should definitely be a part of it. You should point out that it's a part of it and then explain how important it is and use that as part of the justification for why your margins are what they are. It's also, if you are using MailAssure, it's fairly easy to set these things up. We already have the documentation and the information in the platform available for you. So setting up your SPF records should not be very difficult. This should be something that, if you have the registrar information, login information for the domain, this should be something that you can knock out in 2 or 3 minutes. It's the same with the DKIM setup. You get the, you log into MailerSure, you get the public private key pairing, and then you go out and you add that public key to your registrar's records. Again, if you've got access, this takes 2-3 minutes to do this. And then the same with DMARC. It's a fairly straightforward process, but something that's worth extra about mentioning about DMARC is DMARC gives you intelligence and knowledge. The MailerSure and most other filtering solutions are going to have DMARC reports available. And you can set those up to varying degrees of logging, but they're worth reviewing on a monthly basis, maybe a quarterly basis or something, to make sure that there isn't anything funny happening with that domain, that there aren't some random mail server out there in the world that has nothing to do with your infrastructure whatsoever becoming involved in your email flows for some reason. And this can give you a heads up that something is amiss. So if you've never looked at these, again, it's one of those, if you've never dealt with it before, yes, you have a new thing to learn. But once you learn it, you're going to be in a better place and you're going to be able to better secure your clients' environments. And you're also going to be able to respond to, oops, email's not working a lot better. All right, guys. So it's been a pleasure. Everybody have a good weekend and don't hesitate to reach out if you've got any further questions.